All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about trusting your gut, because your gut dictates a lot of your health, not only how your body actually functions, but how you feel on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the differences between digestion and absorption. And it's down in there, but we are going to talk a little bit about the process getting rid of toxins from our body, which is the other process of when we say our gut, it's our whole area from here down. It's not just our stomach, and I'm going to show you a picture of it. I want to tell you a little bit what normal digestion looks like and what happens when things go awry, particularly with something called leaky gut, which is pretty common on the internet, and how leaky gut affects our health, how we can repair it, why do we need probiotics, what do they do, and how does the body clean itself of toxins when it's done and protect itself, and how do we repair the GI tract. So in normal digestion, we have our three big molecules. We've got fat, protein, and carbs. That's what we see in our product labels. But those things have to be broken down. So carbohydrates in particular have to be broken down to glucose. As I was saying last week, we talked a lot about insulin being the key, carrying glucose into the cell with a receptor, and we get our energy. But we have to be able to break down to those smaller particles. So if the protein doesn't break all the way down to the amino acid, or the fat doesn't break down to a fatty acid, it can't be absorbed. And that's really what the difference is. So you can eat a very good diet with the right amount of proteins and carbs and fats and organic and eat a whole bunch of good stuff. But if you are not able to assimilate and bring those nutrients into the smallest piece, then you don't gain the benefit. So you can eat well, but then you have to digest and break the food down. That's digestion, and then you have to be able to absorb it back in. It kind of seems backward because you take it in as like the steak, and then you break it down into the small little peptides, then you absorb it, and then your body builds it back up. But then the body can do what it wants with it. So it has to get down to the smallest building block so it can build back up what it wants to be. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is what I want to show you guys. So when do you actually start digesting your food? In your mouth, really, even when you start thinking about it. Sometimes you start thinking about food, you'll start getting saliva. Oh, I love those, whatever it is, prime ribs. Your mouth will start salivating. And so it actually starts in the mouth. How many times did you chew your food? At least 20 times, right? And the food really, you're secreting more saliva, so you're digesting your food, and it should be unrecognizable by the time it hits your stomach. So I always laugh when Dr. G knows what people, they had Chinese food the night before and egg rolls and all this stuff. I'm like, well, they didn't chew their food very well. Because, right? So the food is broken down to lots and lots of little pieces. The smaller the pieces are, your stomach is full of acid. And it's probably got a pH of around 4. Okay, so it's very acidy, and the smaller the pieces are, the more the acid can coat it, and the better it can keep breaking it down. And then it moves on into here. And you can't see it, but underneath here, this is all the small intestine. There's actually a connection between your stomach and the small intestine. And it's at that beginning point where your gallbladder starts releasing juices, and underneath there is your pancreas. They come together and they all secrete inside here. They release fluids that keep breaking the food down, breaking the food down. Most of the action's happening in your small intestine. The large intestine is really, this is the connection right here, comes all the way up and around, is mostly to absorb water back in so that you can have a bowel movement, because it's mostly waste that's in your colon. But the action's in the small intestine. We call it our gut, but really the action's the small intestine. Okay, so I'm going to explain it. It's a busy slide, I understand. But we went back to that small intestine. Okay, this is how it should look normally. This is like a big tube, and we cut open half of the tube, and you can see what it looks like. So you just kind of slice the tube in half, and this is what it looks like along the wall. These are what the smallest pieces of your intestine look like, the cells. And you see how tight they are together? And it says normal tight junction, because they're supposed to be very tight, and they are literally forming a wall from the blood vessels, because it doesn't want anything from up here that you're eating getting in here before it's ready, because that's when we get into problems. I'm going to explain. I was saying when you've got normal digestion, everything goes well. By the time something hits your small intestine, it's a very minute little piece. It sits right up in here. These are little fingers that constantly keep moving. We call them cilia. And they're just grabbing the nutrients, grabbing it, bringing it in. Everybody's happy. Nobody reacts because it's been broken down. That's when everything works well. So your fat becomes a little bitty fatty acid, it gets absorbed. Your carbohydrate breaks down to glucose, it gets absorbed. Your protein breaks down to amino acid, it gets absorbed, and everybody's happy. Okay, we good on that part? I know it's busy, but I just want to make sure you understand this part right here. And you can see that it's protecting you from the blood vessel. And it's one of the first time that the genes that we have are interacting with our environment. It kind of all happens at this level. There's a lot of reasons, though, that digestion doesn't take place properly. We just said one of them is if you don't chew your food. If you're stressed when you're eating, so when we're answering our emails and our phone calls and trying to do work and multitask, I'm not talking about maybe flipping through something leisurely that you might enjoy, but I mean like you're working on the computer and you're watching TV, you actually will release things in your body. You'll release cortisol, it's a stress hormone. And guess what? It makes these cells separate. That's not a good thing. And we're going to build on that concept later. If you take a lot of antacids, if you take the purple pill every day, you don't have enough of the gastric acid that your stomach has to break it down, or maybe you drink too much, or maybe you weren't born with enough of the good enzymes. Those are things that break those carbohydrates down in the smaller particles. You won't digest your food. If you've got hormonal imbalance, if you're pregnant, if you take antibiotics, if you have infections in your gut that you don't know about, you have high blood sugar, you have food allergies. There's a lot of reasons why it doesn't just go down the hatch and everything happen the way it should. Okay? So we're going to talk about when things go wrong. So now what happens is the food that you might be eating doesn't break quite down. Let's say that you're on Prilosec every day, okay? Which is very common. You didn't have enough acid now in your stomach because the acid was removed by the purple pill. Now the acid is not there to trigger the next part, which is your pancreas, which releases more enzymes to help you digest. It's not there. So now the food that comes along and hits the small intestine, instead of it being a small molecule, it's kind of big, and it kind of wedges its way in between. And this actually triggers a lot of inflammation, because as soon as that food particle slips down to the body, it's infection. That's what the body thinks that is. It thinks that it is an infection, even though it's just a piece of the food that you ate, of the protein, okay? And so it starts reacting, and the immune system says, well, I don't think this is good. Let's go check with the boss. And it kind of goes up to the head immune guys. This is bad, got to get rid of it. Goes back and kind of attacks whatever that thing is that's falling through. And that could often be your food that you're eating that you never used to have problems with for many, many years, and suddenly you develop problems. Or you can have a food allergy. Say you have a food allergy to gluten and don't know it. Just say. And we're going to talk more specifically about that. And you keep eating your gluten, and you're eating a lot of other food, and you're making these cells very leaky, okay? You can see that if there's spaces here, other food's going to flip through, even food that you might not have reacted to. Maybe you didn't used to have a problem with a different grain, say rice, but because you were eating gluten and you were eating rice and you caused all these to kind of break open here, the sieve goes down and you start causing inflammation. So the body says, I need to wall this off, so all the white blood cells get together and try to huddle it. They start releasing other fluids to call more troops in, to cause more infection, and you don't absorb well. Now food is coming through here, and it may be slipping through the cracks before the body's done digesting it. And it's part of how we get what we call autoimmune illnesses, how people get rheumatoid and lupus, multiple sclerosis. A lot of it can be tied back to the gut. And sometimes we don't know what came first. Did the person have a food allergy for many years and never knew it? And then they made their gut kind of leaky and very open, and now new food allergies are coming through? Or are they doing things like excessive coffee, excessive alcohol, excessive sugar, processed foods, and now they're making this kind of, the little slits open up, and now they develop food allergies from that. Sometimes it's hard to tell what came first, the chicken or the egg. Am I losing anyone? Yes?
How do you know if you're inflammatory? How do you know? Is there any symptom if you're inflammatory?
On the next slide, I think I'm going to go through a little bit about that. So you can have a lot of different symptoms. You can have anything from skin rashes to joint aching to feeling tired. Lots of different things can develop that can make you think if you've got food allergies. Okay, so I want to move on a little bit. So what happens, the medical people, for years in functional medicine, we've called it leaky gut. They just renamed it intestinal permeability, so I wanted you to hear the medical word. But I think leaky gut kind of says it all. There's holes in it, it's falling through, you're not absorbing what you need to absorb. Intestinal permeability is like too much explanation. So I just wanted to put that word up there. But anyways, so you can have a food intolerance, and you could create holes. You disrupt the lining. You might have gas. You might have GI symptoms. You might not. You might just have joint pain and rashes. And then you keep not absorbing well. You don't get your nutrients. You have less energy. It creates inflammation. It stresses the body. Oops, and you get more food illnesses, and it just keeps going around and around. More things, the gut becomes looser and looser. Instead of it being tight like a wall, more things are falling through, and they're not digested, so the body pictures it as being a foreign invader. That's what it thinks. So it tries to fight it, even though it's not really an infection. That's what food allergies are. I'm gonna talk a little bit more, and I think it will come together. So this leaky gut phenomenon, you can have a leaky gut. You can have those little holes in the small intestine that I was showing you and not necessarily have food allergies. But you still could have problems because you're not digesting your food. You might have GI symptoms, and the GI symptoms might ultimately affect the good bacteria in your gut, which I'm going to talk about, and it can create anxiety. It might affect your immune system. Why would you have poor immunity when I just said your immune system is being triggered, it's waking it up, it's fighting the infection that's there? Because it's busy doing kind of the boy who cried wolf. That's not really an infection there, but the body thinks that it is, so it gets very busy in that one area, and in the area where it should be protecting you, say from the flu or even cancer, that's what our immune system does protect us from, it's busy doing this Mickey Mouse, so you have a weakened immune system. Yes?
What is FUO?
That was on the side. That stands for fever of unknown origin, just people who run fevers. So you could have breathing problems, you could have bedwetting, chronic joint pain, bladder infections, muscle pain. People say a lot of the time, I got a foggy brain, fuzzy thinking, you're not thinking. Acne, somebody asked me earlier about acne, and you can have that as gut problems. All of these problems can ultimately be traced back to your gastrointestinal tract. Okay, and I just listed, these are actually some actual illnesses. Those were just symptoms, but anything from type 1 diabetes up to autism to asthma and eczema, irritable bowel, can be traced in some ways to this whole concept that you have a leaky gut and your gut lining is not what it should be. Inflammatory bowel disease are classic. Crohn's, ulcerative colitis. Okay. This is the part, this will make a little bit more sense about why we end up getting these autoantibodies. So I was saying that this is unhealthy digestion where you're not doing things the way you want to be doing it. And the body, these antigens just means things that are foreign. They're things that the body does not recognize. So when that partially digested food is coming down, the body doesn't know what it is. And so the body says, I'm going to make an antibody. Because if I make an antibody, that fights that antigen, and I've done my job. I've taken care of the bad guy. Does that make sense? Okay. So when you have a lot of different foods that are coming down, or what the body thinks are foreign invaders, you start creating a lot of antibodies. Sometimes we can measure those antibodies easily. So people who have antibodies to their thyroid, it often can relate back to your gastrointestinal tract. Why? Because the body looks at this abnormality, whatever it is, say it's a piece of food, and says, I'm going to copy that pattern, whatever that pattern is. 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. I'm just saying whatever the pattern is, I'm going to make an antibody, and I'm going to be able to fight that and go back out and just attack right up to that, and everything's going to be good. But sometimes that pattern mimics our own tissue. So it mimics our own thyroid tissue, or it mimics our heart tissue, and it looks very similar, And that's how you actually can end up having food allergies create this autoimmune problem. You got a question? Am I losing everyone? Yes. I got a superintendent who says I've lost everybody, so I need to make sure. Somebody ask me a question because I know that I've lost people and it was not my intent.
Autoimmune.
Okay, so when you make an antibody against yourself, I have a thyroid gland. I only want to make an antibody against that flu that you just brought in when you touched my hand. I don't want to make an antibody against my thyroid. But if I have a leaky gut, the food that I'm trying to react to, the pattern on that protein looks so similar to our thyroid that we make the antibody and it attacks both things. And it might attack your thyroid and the food that you're eating. Does that clear it up a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Metabolism, help create energy. I think it's going to get a little bit clearer when I just wanted to give you a little bit of the background. I didn't want to lose you too much, but just to kind of create that visual. So we talk a lot about, people talk about food allergies now and intolerances, and that's why I had Julie here bringing some food in. And an intolerance, think of like I'm lactose intolerant, people might say. That doesn't mean that they have an immune problem. It just means that they can't break one thing down in that milk and they get gas and bloating, and it's not really an allergy. Sometimes they can get away with small amounts of milk, but if they have a whole bowl of ice cream, we got a problem, okay? So it happens more gradually. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes you have to eat a lot of food. It's not a life-threatening problem. That's an intolerance. So lactose intolerance is not life-threatening. But if you have an allergy, it comes on very suddenly. It can be triggered with even a small amount of food, and it can happen every time you eat the food, and it can be life-threatening. So you can think about a shellfish allergy or a peanut allergy. People get that visual, it's very quick, okay? So here, the immune system was called on. Here, the immune system doesn't really care. It wasn't reacting to anything. There was not a leaky gut. It's just there was something that, MSG, people eat Chinese food. And it's not that they have an allergy to the MSG, it's just that the MSG makes them feel bad. It's a different scenario. Does that make sense? Okay. But there are different types of allergies, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, because that's this whole hot topic of people being not on gluten and on gluten, and I don't really have an allergy, but I do have an allergy, and doctors who don't want to say it really exists because it's not meeting their full criteria. And the reason is because there are two types of allergies, and you can think of this as immediate, like when I have a peanut, and this can be more delayed. So someone can have a dairy allergy, not lactose intolerant. They literally have a dairy allergy. They get all that inflammation in their gut that calls on the immune system. We get that whole thing happening, but it may not happen today. I might eat dairy, and I might break out in 3 days from a rash. It may not happen immediate. That's why trying to diagnose these type of allergies is very difficult. There are testing available. There is testing available. The problem is it doesn't always reproduce on other tests. And if you're not eating the food, you may not find that you have an allergy to it. So gluten can be like that. Gluten can be one of those things where we used to think, oh, you have to be withering away, weigh nothing, have severe diarrhea, and then the doctors would think about this whole gluten thing, or what they call celiac. But we know now that many, many, many people, hundreds of people I've taken care of, they don't necessarily test full positive on the antibodies when I check them, because the testing is very limited if you want to try to do it with insurance. And I just say, why spend the money? You have all of these other, you might have joint pain, you might have GI symptoms, you might have bloating, you might have fatigue, foggy brain. Why don't we just remove the common allergens and see if you get better? Because we could put your money and your effort towards getting well instead of doing testing. So there is a distinction, and mostly what we're going to be talking about now is going to be about these kind of what I call delayed food allergies. You don't always know which food it is. You do have chronic symptoms, whereas when you have a shellfish, once you get your steroids or your EpiPen, or you get bit, you get the Epi shot, your symptoms will go right away. But if you have something from dairy, it's going to take a while, because I told you triggered all that inflammation in the gut, And it takes a long time to tell all those people everything's okay, you don't need to react, calm down and get rid of it. And the symptoms, like I said, are very delayed. People say, well, I ate this today, I didn't have a reaction. I'm like, yeah, but you might have ate something 3 days ago and had a reaction. So it gets kind of challenging. And so the only way to really avoid these is just not eat that food at all. Sometimes when you treat your gut and your intestines, you can re-challenge yourself with some of these more delayed allergens. And I'm gonna talk to you about that. Yes?
How do you say that? What is that, a 1GG?
It's I should have just wrote the word delayed. It's just a specific antibody that you check for. It's just a delayed food allergy. You can put that in your notes, delayed and immediate. It's the easiest way for you to remember it. We good? Am I losing everyone really bad? Okay. Okay, so let me just see where we're at here. I'm going to check my time here too. Time myself, Marilyn, I'm working on it. All right, I'm good. Okay, so what happens when you have food allergies, and the kind I was just talking about? You might not have any stomach symptoms. Your stomach might be fine, and you might have headaches. It could be a food allergy. There's 100 other things it could be, of course, but for the purpose of this class, we're talking about they can actually be a problem. Some people have had problems with walking, okay, as they gotten older, and they found out that it's actually related to gluten. They went to the bathroom every day fine, never had heartburn, never took the purple pill, never had a stomach symptom, but there actually was a food problem. So it can happen. What I find a lot, I usually find some sort of a GI symptom. And it may not be a symptom that a patient thinks is a symptom. So they might think, well, you know, it's normal to only go to the bathroom 3 times a week or 4 times a week. And it's not. Actually, normal bowel movements should be really ideally like 2 times a day, minimum. Right? So, but we were taught, our belief is, well, it's normal for me. But I'm telling you, it's not. What's normal is you eat every day, you should go to the bathroom at least twice a day. Really. So, or people might think it's normal to take, you know, Tums. I only take it a couple times a week. That's not normal. You shouldn't need to do that. So they may think the symptom is here, but when I dig, well, actually, that's not really normal. You know, there really might be something, and it makes it easier to help identify it. Or it just makes it more believable. It's really hard for patients to accept I can have a problem with a food when I don't get any symptoms in my gut. But it's true. Okay. We good? Okay. Let me see here. So I wanted to list the top food allergens, okay? And a lot of them we know. Shellfish, wheat, seafood, and underneath wheat I would actually say gluten also. Milk, eggs, soy, peanuts, and certain tree nuts. And this represents nightshades. Eggplants, peppers, like bell peppers, the green and red, potatoes, tomatoes. And I'm not saying never eat these things. I'm saying that I'm going to get to a point of this when you're trying to sift out what's going on with yourself. These are top allergens. So we might not want to end up eating these for a certain time frame to see what's going on with our system. These are all things that you can do on your own. Okay, but gluten is a big problem. Okay, and these are some signs that you could have a gluten. They wrote intolerance, but it's really an allergy from any of these symptoms, and they can be isolated with no stomach symptoms at all. I think that's really, really important. I mean, if you go to listen to any David Perlmutter who does functional neurology, which is what I do, but he applies it all to neurology, people often go to see him, and we'll talk about it next week, that a lot of it can be gluten, okay? So people say a lot of times, well, why, my doctor checked me for gluten. We might as well bring this up because this is going to come up. And they said I don't have gluten. Okay. There are at least 12 main little pieces of that wheat or that food that you're eating that your body can react to. The standard tests only check for 2, and most people don't even order those 2 properly. And a lot of times when people are negative on that, if you test them on a separate lab that's independent and doesn't take insurance, of course, you will actually find a lot more allergy. You'll actually be able to show the patient, here, this actually shows it's positive. But again, They run like $450 or $500. I feel like that's an enormous amount of money when, you know, that's several months worth of getting yourself well. It's a little more challenging when people just feel they can't do it or they must know or they really have to, then, you know, then we look at doing those testing. But I don't always jump to that. Okay. So what is the whole idea of a probiotic? Does people know what probiotics are? They hear it all the time talking about it. It just really literally means for life. These are little bacteria that are microscopic. We can't see them with our eyes. They actually live anywhere we've got our nose, our mouth, our ears, our vaginal tract, our urinary tract, our gut. They're all there. There's actually more of them than there are of us. Literally, like if you counted cells. But we couldn't live without them. I mean, they're part of what helps us. And particularly, who lives in this area from here to here is determined by a lot of things. It's actually determined from the moment that you're born, if you were born vaginally or C-section, if you were breastfed versus formula, antibiotics you receive in your life, medications, stress, all of these things will dictate who lives there. And we want the good guys living there because we're finding more and more out about the bad guys creating problems. Why? Well, they are a living organism just like we eat, we breathe, we make products, and we make waste products. They do the same thing. And sometimes the things that they're making, if they're not on our team, they're creating more havoc to our health. They're not there. So the good guys do a lot for us. They do everything from, they actually help the body decide if something is normal or abnormal. They actually help you digest your food. They actually will affect the pH if you have too much of the bad guys on board. They help your bowels move, so things keep going. It can even affect your cholesterol. They make your B vitamins, right? People take B vitamins, and that's good, but they will actually make some of our B vitamins for us. They'll make vitamin K, which is very important for our bones, for our heart. It's made there. And a really big important thing is made there that is the link that we think between, one of the many links between the brain and the gut, is they make tryptophan, which makes serotonin, which helps make one of our feel-good hormones in our brain. So it's always, almost always, I have a person who's chronically constipated. They're not usually very happy. And it's not just from the constipation. They really have a reason for not feeling happy. I mean, it really can be there. And just going to say the word, people might have heard the word. Yes, go ahead.
There's a lot of different probiotics out there. How do you know which one to buy? The expensive one?
Not always, and so they don't have to be refrigerated. I will say that they do not have to be refrigerated. That's kind of a myth. And they should be mixed species. Usually will have a lot of L dot, so there'll be several different types of L that stands for lactobacillus. There'll be several types of B when you're talking about gut health. And you're looking for one that's at least, 10 to 25 billion. It'll actually say billion, and it'll say CFU. That's the measurement. Sometimes you got to take more than one when you're getting them over the counter. If you're using them for vaginal health, it's a different type of probiotic. But most of these general ones that are really good, like the one I think I put in your packet, I think Ultimate Flora is a pretty good one over the counter. It happens to have a lot of different species in it. And Jarrow, Jarrow, does it.
Can you trust like Swanson's, their brand?
I mean, you'll know if you're having a GI problem and you are taking your probiotics and you start improving, then you know that they're working. If they're not, then it might be the probiotic. It could be other reasons. It could be because you need other things, but it's one way to eliminate it. Yep.
How long does it take them to really feel like it starts working?
Depends what the problem is. If it's constipation, it may take a couple weeks. If it's diarrhea, it may be as quick as a week. This is because I want to just briefly mention the other thing that our GI tract does for us. It actually removes a lot of the things that we get exposed to on a regular basis. And some things we can't control for, like environmental pollution, but we can clean with cleaner products. You don't need to use dryer sheets. You can choose to have a green yard. I mean, obviously we can't control what goes overhead. A lot of the cosmetics that we apply have things in them that are not necessarily good, and our body, particularly our liver, wants to help us get rid of those things. And so people always, why do you say the word detox when you really want to lose weight and people don't know about detox? I'm like, what? But that's the most important thing, so I had to tell you about it. So we make, it's normal. We eat things, we make waste. It's a normal part of any living process, whatever it is, it's normal. We also take medications that we weren't necessarily planning on. And so you can only fit so much things in that suitcase. And when they get overloaded by unhealthy lifestyles, exposures to things that may not be so good for us, it gets kind of stuffed and things don't work well. All of that gunk inside there starts mimicking, for instance, our insulin and causing that insulin resistance, or it starts mimicking other things and it starts interfering with how our body wants to work because we're really, literally toxic. I mean, sometimes it's very easy to see. You can see the person who's 70 years old, who smoked 2-pack cigarettes their whole life, who drank, who just didn't take care of them. And you could see how they've aged as opposed to somebody who's maybe taking better care of themselves. But sometimes we can look pretty good on the outside and may not necessarily be clearing ourselves of those toxins, and that's part of what we want to be able to do. It's busy, and I'm going to explain it. I'm not even going to talk about this slide as much as I am tell you that there's 2 steps to it, and this is how I explain detoxifying. It's like washing your clothes. When you have all the things that your body wants to get rid of, it's a big pile of dirty clothes, and you know that they're dirty and they stink, right? You put them into the washing machine. That's the first part, okay? And when you wash those clothes, what happens if you leave them, even though they're clean, but you let them sit in the washing machine for too long? They smell worse than they did before they went into the washing machine. And when our body, say, finishes using, let's just say the estrogen that our body makes, because our bodies make them throughout our whole life, even after we go through menopause, and we'll talk about this in one of the last slides, the body's done with it. Okay, I'm done with it, I want to get rid of it. All it means is taking something that will not dissolve in water to turning it into something that will dissolve in water so we can get it out of our body. That's what that whole detoxification thing means. And so when those clothes are wet, we have to slip them into the dryer, okay? Because that's the second phase. We got to dry our clothes. And when we dry our clothes, we hang them up, we fold them, we're good. If you can't get the clothes from here to here, then you end up with problems because your toxins become more toxic. And part of having good digestion means that you are eliminating toxins. So if you don't have good bowel movements, for instance, you don't get rid of those toxins, okay? Okay, so how do we fix the gut? We do it by removing things that might be offensive, replacing things that it needs. Sometimes it needs enzymes to help digest, giving it back some of the good bacteria it may have been missing, and things to help seal up the holes in the gut. So I put this on here because you guys can read it, but basically you're removing processed foods, poor quality fats, excess carbs and grains. Forget about the stress, eat consciously. You're trying to replace more water in your diet, more veggies, less grains, ideally keep them gluten-free, ideally try to be organic. Add in the probiotics and the food that help promote the growth of good bacteria. And one of the other slides, I had listed things that were below the glycemic index, like onions and garlic and mushrooms. Those are just going to provide flavor, but they also help feed your good guys. And then repair it, which I have another slide on that. How do you seal the gut back up? And so I just gave you a list of some of the top things that will not only get rid of inflammation, but also help your gut heal so that you will have better digestion. And in the back of your handouts, not as part of the slides, I wrote a little mini test that you can try with yourself for like 28 days to see what happens when I remove all these things from my diet. How do I feel towards the end of that 28 days? And then when I start adding in back some of these things, how do I feel? I think it's in the handouts that came from today, and I'll look at it at the break so we can go on. And I just, I alluded to it, it's going to come up again when I do brain health, but what happens in your gut can trigger your immune system. If it's getting things that it's leaky, it's telling that immune system there's something wrong. When the immune system gets called on, it affects your brain and you don't think clearly. Our brain also will send more messages to our immune system, and it becomes this kind of vicious cycle of the connection between our gut, our brain, and our immune system. And so as functional medicine doctors, we always say to start with the gut, because if you can fix this, you can fix a lot of the other problems that are going on. And that's basically it. The difference between kind of feeling vivacious and young and healthy and and not sometimes can be as simple as how healthy your gut is.